Alright, hit the button. Professor Antone video. Yeah, it's a long one, so this is going to be a while, no doubt. And it's about this word agency that caught my eye. Of course, he's got evolution and culture in there, nature. But, so, you know, general what it is to be human type video, right? But this word agency, all of a sudden, has been all over the place. I mean, Karina said it on Saturday in Stickam, and it just stuck in my head. I said, ooh, she used that word agency. All this, why do I have to respect people's agency? No, what? What is that? I have to respect them because they have a thing called agency? No, they have to have more than that. They have to have actual competence or something to respect in their agency, how they use their agency. If their agency tells them, to be a white-collar criminal or something, I don't have to respect that. I don't have to respect if they're doing something ignorant. So agency itself doesn't mean much. But anyway, that's where it started. Is that just... Why did you say that word? And then I heard Heroin Church say it, and there was some other guy who said it, and then there was some other one, I don't remember it. And now this. Now there it is again. In 1 week. So, yeah, I'm going to talk... And coincidentally, there was this little conversation between me and Modern Mystic and just about no one else about the old free will subject again. And Conference Report did join in a bit. But anyway, so just kind of curious. Anyway, so let's see if we can go anywhere with this mush.
So I thought I'd follow up on one of the videos I shot a couple days ago, and it was on the future of science and religion, and I wanted to say just a couple more things about that, and see if I can't maybe talk a little bit about Stoicism and how the Stoic worldview fits into that.
The Stoic worldview, which is just nonsense, right? I mean, just take it. Yeah, the big, wordy, pus-covered thing is coming right for you. Yeah, just, bend over and grease yourself up and accept it. Yeah, with a little smile on your face. And the Stoic equals asshole.
Okay, so one of the claims, and I want to support this claim. I want to get people involved in this discussion, which is, could consciousness have not been? And I try.
Oh dear, yeah, we've been over and over and over this, but So there's two aspects to the function here, right? I mean, we know that the physics is the physics. All right, and the only way you could change the dynamic of how the pinball bounces is you have to refire it. Okay, you have to change the permutations at the origin. If there was no flippers, the game just plays. And there's no flippers in the universe. There's nothing injecting anything to fuck with it. So all you got is the physics. So by the physics demanded our existence. It's a deterministic universe. We're just bouncing our little ways through, just as a stream would eddy, and just as anything that has a mechanical structure is going to do what it's going to do, and it'll look interesting. It'll do spirally little things, and water will flip up all at once, but it has nothing to do with any kind of anything, but it's inevitable that that's what's going to happen because of the dynamics in place. The meteor that was going to hit the dinosaurs was in its place billions of years ahead of time, or at least millions. And it was just a destined moment. And the sentence I just said was a destined moment built out of thousands of years of human culture and development of language and conceptualizations and science education and my personal life experience of living here and then going there and visiting this and seeing that and watching this and hearing that person. And there it is. There's the sentence built out of that coalescing of the circumstances. But that's all there are, is the circumstance. And we're just the projection of it through time. And yes, this consciousness was inevitable in this universe. But if you could refire the ball on the machine, the point that's been made to you that you haven't responded to is that if you could refire the ball, the odds of you ever playing this game again, okay, with this kind of consciousness, might be, you might have to fire that ball a bazillion, zillion, zillion times. I mean, if the dinosaurs didn't get squashed and we didn't have our little circumstance, if we just move that meteor and just say, don't hit the Earth, the dinosaurs lived. Yeah, the smartest thing on Earth might right now be a Tyrannosaurus. Dragonflies have been around 300 million years and haven't gained a single IQ point. That's what life does. Okay, that's what it does most of the time. And here in 4 billion years, it's only done this human-y type thing for a little tiny bit of time. So don't be deluded to think this is how the game is usually played. This is the unusual game, not the common game.
I have to say that rather than people haggling about, the characteristic of God and, what characteristics does God have, or is there not a God, and do you have justified true beliefs about the divine? Just move to the question of...
Yeah, really, we ought to just do something with these God botherers. Get them out of any kind of rational conversation. They can't be in a rational conversation. Let them drool and spit up on each other in the cage somewhere, in a proper playpen where they can't hurt anyone. It's not philosophy. It's stale, retarded, archaic, dumb dogma.
Could consciousness have not been? And
well, what do you mean by consciousness? Because of course you're going to change that definition. It's self-reflective, understands the word booger consciousness, when it's to your convenience. Consciousness, all right, this brain function thing is happening for every one of you little humanoids. There's a billion other little animals scurrying about having quite elaborate emotional experience. Yes, they don't know language, they don't know their own name, but their little hearts are beating and their little brains are consuming calories, creating the illusion of ego and importance and need and want, fear. All of that crap is flying through their little neurology right now. And if that was all that was on Earth, futile little creatures eking out, sad and pitiful little redundant lives, would you have all this, mushy talk about how the universe deliberately creates this crap? I don't think so.
I guess I want to say that, from my own perspective, it couldn't have not been. And when I say that consciousness couldn't have not been, I'm trying to say that there is an orderliness to the cosmos such that consciousness is a fulfillment and
a fulfillment. I mean, come on. Let's argue that there's this evolution of matter, and matter can complexify. And there's levels of complexification it can achieve, apparently, quite obviously. Compounds can mix together, create compounds in the earth that are very unusual, very rare. Elements can be formed in environments like diamonds, that'll be very rare and unusual and kind of spectacular to our perception. If they were common, they wouldn't be so spectacular, but regardless. A grain of sand has an interesting character. And the universe does seem to produce a lot of that. So yeah, there's a certain dynamic of the chemistry, and the fact that when you smash it together and mix it up and do these things with it, it will change into things. The chemistry will combine and create something that has its own character. Now, does it inevitably mean that it's going to turn into something that can reproduce itself, a little reproducing machine? We have evidence of that happening one time only. That's it. Once. That's the only thing we have evidence of. One single time a cell was created that could replicate itself. In all the known that we know universe, we have evidence of one single event. One. So how can, to talk of the nature of the universe to do this? So in that little island on one little planet, Mars and Venus and all the others are all void of it. Certainly all the suns are void of it. There's no sun life that we've ever noticed in the universe. All the suns seem to be functioning the same. They don't animate. They don't have big talky voices and shoot fire out of their mouths. So obviously other parts of the universe don't seem to have any need or initiative to do this complexification thing and iterate. So I've used the word rust before, but yes, here on Earth things can rust. Things can do this oxidization thing, and they can get more complicated that way. And funky. So they're doing something funky. And obviously the first life forms were pretty funky, mold and shit. Stuff we look down on now from our elevated life form perspective. And probably to some extent rightfully so, because its function is stupid. It just redundantly produces itself for nothing. There's nothing else accomplished. It's just consumption and reproduction and consumption and reproduction. And that's all there is to this mechanic. And then when you add this natural selection thing that allows this stuff to change, then it changes in predictable ways because of the nature of competition. There'll be obvious tools that will be of obvious advantage, and those will be obviously acquired. But that's as far as it goes, right? The high intelligence hasn't even been tested by natural selection, and from every rational perspective, it doesn't look very probable that it's going to survive natural selection.
A development of one of its inherent potentialities, that is, one of the inherent potentialities of the cosmos was to have a consciousness that experiences the depth and the range and the kind of complexity of the matter that's there.
Well, whatever that means again. So, the most precious things to us are our feelings and our ego and all this crude kind of stuff. So all this talk as if we're doing something spectacular. Talk about a Tyrannosaurus and all this glowing bibble-babble and the reverie and the joy it feels as it consumes its victim. Nom, 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 nom. Are you gonna do all this glory talk about the great white shark, the tree sloth, or this little boner as it goes to create the next tree sloth? Come on.
And I guess it's trying to account for the structure and the orderliness, say, of mathematics in the world, but then also how that relates to the emergence of a consciousness that could recognize that orderliness.
Well, whatever. The fact that, again, that we would develop tools that would enable us to do this, modeling thing, and that's all it is. That's the substance of our intelligence, is built on this idea that we can model the world so we know where the trees are, so we know how to run around the trees, so we don't run into the trees, so we could do whatever we're doing, catch the prey or run away from the booger man or whatever the game is being played here. But the game is that we model the universe in our brain, then we can run the model, then we can understand what to do. And so there becomes a connection between our modeling brain and logic, because we need to have it be accurate. So the system that runs in our head is trying to duplicate the rigidity of reality, in that it demands a certain function, a certain logical, this equals that under this circumstance, kind of A plus B equals C plus F, or whatever. There's a logic that you have to be able to duplicate in your brain if you're going to be accurate, if you're going to know that trees can't fly and that birds don't grow leaves.
Now, if I say that consciousness couldn't have not been, and that nature evolved free beings, but it didn't nature didn't.
Free beings. I mean, what are you even going to go with that? I mean, that's just words. And it didn't involve them, okay? So natural selection is the force that basically constrains the nature of the organism, which is this faculty of reproduction. And so the way you're describing it isn't really fair to the reality. You have the functionality of reproduction, and you have the framework of natural selection.
Nature didn't choose to evolve beings who would experience choice, but we have been fated to that experience.
Yeah, well, that's right. In this version of the game, this is where the game went. And level 1 was achieved, and level 2, level 3, the levels of complexification, where you open some kind of new door and you enable this new functionality to exist. And so you could talk about, warm blood and all the different levels that you'd have to reach before you can have this some new possibility.
And so when you get to the individual level, so like when I say that when you look back at your own past and you look at your own life, and your own life couldn't, when you look at your own past and you imagine that you could have done otherwise, what you're doing is you're imagining that you weren't there.
Well, whatever. You're playing the model. You're saying, let's change one event. Let's take the meteor out. What would happen to life on Earth? Let's take this out. What would happen here if I did this or I did that? We have this illusion of choice. Like we have this possibility that I can do two different things. And I feel no impulse that tells me which one I'm actually going to do because I'm sort of undecided. So, yeah, I can imagine one. I can imagine the other. I can play the model out and say which one will produce what result. And but I don't disappear when I do that.
And it doesn't mean that your life is determined. No, the way that your life was determined is that you were determined to experience agency and choice. In nature...
Yeah, well, whatever. And you were also determined to think exactly what you're thinking. All right? And if you were born in another country, you wouldn't be the person you are. These are all facts. All these little events in your life define who you are and what you say and what you think and how you've lived. And so it's just... again, this is just bullshit. There's no agency here in terms of any freedom or any, we're byproduct. That's all it is. We're byproduct. Byproduct. We are, the container makes us. The stream bed is what made us. We don't do anything else but what it says.
Evolved organisms somehow, I mean, the expression is it's a weird grammar, nature evolved organisms. I mean, I don't think nature chose by conscious intention or life didn't choose by conscious intention to emerge self-reflexive conscious beings. It was a necessary fulfillment.
Necessary. So that's the funky part here. I mean, if you want to just argue that it was just the byproduct of the initial circumstances, whatever those are, whatever put the water on top of the mountain, we're a byproduct of whatever did that. But depending on how the water's put up there and how much water's put up there will decide how the stream ends up at the bottom, how the water ends up at the bottom of the hill. And that's all we are. We're just falling down the hill of circumstance.
And of one of the potentialities, right? One of the potentialities of this cosmos was reflection back upon itself.
And again, that is another one of these bogus kinds of terms. You're reflecting upon yourself, your own ego is aggrandizing yourself. You have no clue what it is to be the universe, even a tiny piece of it. So if you had all knowledge, and all knowledge told you that yes, life is just a bizarre happening in the first place, the first reproducing cell, and intelligence, let's say it's happened 10,000 times, and every time it ends in just futile destruction. Less than 30,000 years from its initiation of the first 10,000 word language, the organism possessing it is dead. If that's the reality of the universe, are you still going to wave these little flags of this is all magic or something, and it's not just a bunch of chemistry chasing Cheeto? I mean, it's just chemistry chasing attraction and repulsion. Chemistry moved by attraction and repulsion. Chemistry moved by physical forces and eddying. Nothing profound, nothing meaningful. It just does it eccentrically now and then. And it's for nothing. It accomplishes nothing. It goes nowhere.
To various degrees. And so sentience itself and awareness and life, and whether or not there would be the kind of human existence that we know with the imagination and the memory and all these other kinds of.
Yeah, well, look, those animals all have imaginations and memories, okay? Leopards and lions and cheetahs and gazelles and hawks and vultures and wildebeest and especially elephants, okay? Those are a little dumber. That's a whole different kind of class. But billions and billions of those things for every one of you stinky humans on this shithole. And you talked about the things that really mean something, and those are things that are possessed by those creatures. And how come they're never in the conversation? How come? Oh, that's right, because it's all about your capacity to actually say the words, I am great. And because they can't say the words, they're not great. Yeah, that's pretty fucking funny.
Those to me are very different than could human emergence, what we're talking about, with the alphabet and all of the other kinds of communication technologies that we have now. Okay, so I think part of what I'm trying to suggest is that it's a very complex argument.
What are we using? Again, look at TV. Go watch some TV and go see what we're using all our technology for. And see how base it is and how crude it is. We're using our cell phones to, organize our life of cheating on our wives or some other kind of bullshit. So, don't talk to me about this like we're going somewhere, except we're just sitting there finding out. We are glittering toilets.
I'm trying to say that, again, nature itself. See, Matt, it was Matt gave this video where he was talking about light, and he was saying, the light preceded life here on the planet. And to some extent, the photon makes the
yeah, well, duh. I mean, this is all this mystical, preposterous exaggeration. I mean, heat. I mean, we could go through every one of the physical structures of chemistry and say it preceded the existence of life, but it doesn't do it in some magical way. This is what chemistry does, and you're not going to have chemistry that can do all this thinking and all this other crap unless you got a whole bunch of energy in a very thermal environment, okay, where it can do lots of interactions.
Possible that as eyes emerged only because photons were already there, and to that extent, eyes are like a distant relative of the photon. And so he says, eyes are kind of like sight themselves in the natural world. And I see what he was saying. Part of me really, it was a beautiful metaphor, and I like it to the extent that, Hans Jonas has some interesting stuff on the nobility of sight. There are interesting ways to come at it. But, your skin tans because of light. Photosynthesis is all...
Yeah, right. Well, you're the one who brought this crap up. Obviously, yeah, there's a whole bunch of physical phenomenon, and there's just no point in getting all gooey about it. It doesn't mean anything except, yes, obviously, we're made of chemistry. Ooh.
Also occurring. So, there are different potentialities that photons have evolved. Life has evolved various potentialities to response to the orderliness that photons, or the ambiguous orderliness that photons...
Well, why even do that? Ambiguous orderliness. The sensible chaos. Let's put a bunch of wrong words together to play a game. The point is that there's logic in the basic mechanics. Okay, things can do certain things. They have properties. They have A-ness or B-ness or C-ness, and then you can combine those things only in certain ways. And the same is true for our structure. And there is this unfortunate logic built into our structure. But the logic has to have the value equation for the logic to have a purpose and functioning. And the only value in this entire equation is this contrived value of survival. That's what biological organisms do. They survive for the sake of survival. Merely to reproduce. To redundantly create and die. Create, die, create, die. And merely because that's what their body does. It reproduces. And in a fixed, closed environment, it can't reproduce without dying. Because then it can't reproduce anymore. It won't work. It will fail. And it probably did many, many times before successful life figured out, we got to kill ourselves. For the logic.
And are. But I think the point that I would try to say is, I think, Matt was suggesting, I guess, something like the argument that you have to say consciousness itself was always part of the cosmos, rather than to say consciousness.
Yeah, whatever. Let's just discount the need for 100 billion brain cells. Right.
Merged, but emerged as a kind of logical...
Look, we know when we have a baby or when you make sperm cells, a piece of your consciousness doesn't break off and go into the thing, right? We know that our consciousness is not made out of some kind of kernel of consciousness, okay, that we've somehow captured and we've built around. It just doesn't work that way. It requires the brain cells. If I pull your brain cells out one by one, eventually I'll pull out ones that are going to make you unconscious.
I don't want to say inevitability so much as it was a logical prerequisite and a logical possibility that now, given the fact, it couldn't have not been. We can look at it right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. In hindsight, right, the train doesn't crash unless the conductor gets drunk. So, duh. Yeah, that's right. There are certain prerequisites to certain outcomes. Right.
That individually, again, we're struggling with this. I think individually, we experience agency. We experience choice. One of the most dynamic...
Experience. So now we're going to use this word again. We experience choice. There's such a cheat on these words. We experience agency. We experience a lot of emotions that we've put labels on. Do you think those labels are adequate to the task? and so what's the... I mean, experience doesn't qualify it. Because it's an experience doesn't mean it's an experience reflecting truth or reflecting substance or anything. Anything. It doesn't have anything to do with what we've defined the word as. So when you experience something called a choice, it's not really a choice, and it's an illusion in your brain that this is somehow what you're doing, but you're not doing it anyway because there's no you anyway. You is a combination of software programs.
The most important features of being human is that slow and steady emergence to oneself that occurs over a long developmental period. But one slowly learns to become increasingly consciously aware of one's choices, gains greater senses of temporal expanses, greater sensibilities of the future and the past, and all of these, they're so...
Well, whatever. Some people never grow up, so even that isn't really true. I argue that, there's a certain evolution that takes place within all kinds of environments, and the certain rules is that the more you move, the faster you move, or some other momentum rule. And I would argue that intelligence has the same kind of momentum. That the less preoccupied your brain is or caught up in the eddies of fantasy or self-actualization of your ego drives or desires, and the more you do this abstract thing or some other kind of more temperate and thoughtful contemplation, that you'll gain more from that in terms of understanding the world, because that's what you're trying to do, is understand it. So if you use a microscope, you'll learn more about the little tiny critters than if you just make it up. If I just sit here and make it up, I'm not going to probably do as well as I'll do with a microscope.
Subject to cultural variation and historical variation. But I think, the Stoic view is something like, there are some things under your power.
Oh, here we go again, 12-stepping. Again, it just every single thing is under our power. The only thing you have to decide is your investment, because there's chances and odds and permutations. You could know that there's, I could learn how to play the piano, and what are my odds of being able to make a living playing the piano? And so you could figure out that, it's not a really high odd return here. So maybe I should invest my time in something else. So, come on, it's not...
There are other things not under your power. And the point is that you do have an experience of agency. You do have an experience.
Yeah, well, whatever. You have... the experience of it is just merely your brain showing you that these are what the software has considered. These are the themes and concepts your brain is aware of. You're unaware of certain ones, okay? Like the odds of, let's say, trains derailing. I don't have that exact figure in my head. And so maybe some plan I have was sort of contingent on me understanding that, because I invested in something that was made... less likely to be fruitful because I didn't have that piece of knowledge or something like that. If we have to understand how thick the paper is and how strong the bag is and how strong the box is and how strong all these things are if we're going to be the supervisor of this warehouse. We have to know how you can pick things up and how much you can turn them upside down and how much you can shake them without breaking them. We have to learn a lot of stuff about how this stuff works, to be able to manage it.
Experience of something like free choice. And
all right. Well, again, we can keep saying it, but it doesn't mean anything. So, when are you just going to... well, of course you're going to, because I don't get to make the rules. But I think I've annihilated the word free. It doesn't mean anything. Free is releasement from obligation. Intelligence is the imposition of obligation. So this whole idea, the only way to be free is to drink lead paint. Get dumb and you're free. All right? So there's no point in talking about free will as if it's a good thing. All right? Because you don't want free will. You want informed will.
And determined to have that. See, so it's a both-and situation where it's not that you're either free or determined. No, nature...
Well, you are determined. So again, you can... The fact that you will, make love to all sides of these arguments just doesn't excuse this, okay? I mean, you're either going to have to explain where the undetermined physics comes from. You're going to have to come up with something, and you can't just use the voodoo string theory, or it's not even quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics doesn't oblige there to be any true, real randomness. So again, you're going to have to come up with where this undeterministic, this whammy ball gets thrown into the game. Where's the flippers in the universe, and who's flipping them?
Determined that certain small localized pockets, that is, it evolved these little localized pockets of at first collective self-legislation, and then through various communication technologies, individual self-legislation. I mean, the notion of individuals, I guess, anonymously through money and literacy, shifting through, sort of functionally shifting through space and time, as with credit card, I guess, with various things.
Well, I don't know what the hell that was. So, credit cards shifting through space and time. I didn't. Sorry, I couldn't.
Advanced communication technologies, they've been able to free themselves from tribal lives, from
tribal lives. They freed themselves from living stupid lies, voodoo, and superstition. So again, you're romanticizing the life of the ignorant primitive, who went back to nature, went back to not understanding the futility. Not knowing the stupid and barbaric history of their existence.
Dependency upon particular geographical, limits. Most people throughout history were really limited in geography compared to people who live today with sort of modern communication technology.
They were limited in everything. That wasn't the only thing they were limited in. They didn't understand any of the boxes or the bags or anything, okay? All they were doing was a crude dance to avoid having things blow up on them, but they never understood how any of it worked.
And so I think that, the point is that to say that consciousness couldn't have not been, and to say that one's past...
Well, again. This is what you got to separate these subjects. Once the universe is initiated, it's deterministic. But it is possible to imagine changes. And that if you reran it with the changes, that some other result would happen. There is the possibility for us to use our brains to randomize, to reinitiate the game, and understand how tiny changes make dramatic changes.
Be other than it is now that you've already done what you've done. It's not a predetermination. It's not a suggestion that you don't have any sense of agency or free will. I think the point is that it emerged, and even as it exists as a...
whatever. I don't think it can exist as anything else. I mean, I don't think you can have consciousness without a perception of immediacy. And again, because we're blind to the logic. We don't see the logic. We don't get to see why one idea sticks in our head and why another one falls out. We just get the end result that says, well, that sure did stick in my head. But we don't get to understand exactly why. And the whys has to do with the fundamental logic that structures it. And that it makes it capable of model making. Our brain couldn't model make. if it didn't have that faculty built into it. So now when it sees something or hears something, it can tell the difference between something that's meaningful and something that's bullshit.
It's a semi-autonomous function that we deal with by higher order strategies and to limited degrees, and it's never...
Well, again, let's be clear on what the we is. We don't deal with it. Our brain deals with it. Our brain made up of our experience, our memes, our ideas, our concepts, our philosophy.
Fully, 100%. I think a better word is perhaps the management of constraints and passive constraints. The way that you can, through your very openness to the future, the way that you can anticipate, what likely temptations or places, you can have certain goals where you maybe will...
Well, what you is that? Again, the you who's 5 years old, the you who's 10, the you who's 30, the you who's 50. I mean, we have all these yous in us, all these competing interests, so to speak. I mean, even sometimes it seems pretty clear that different parts of our body, have a conflict of interest with the rest of the parts.
I don't know. You avoid going to a certain grocery store that you know has food that's bad for you if you're trying to watch your diet. Just as a very simple example. Now, it's not the surest thing that one can do, but there are ways that one can, again...
Well, one doesn't do it. The ideas do it. The stronger the idea becomes, the more you do it, right? The more you hear it, my brain needs to... This is how you learn how to control... You gain software programs that become efficient at controlling the brain function, and as they sit there and judge each other, the software programs, and as the programs evolve, and that's what they're doing, the same way we are. And it's by this deterministic process of which you've been exposed to. The power of the logic, again, is applied and forced onto the circumstance. It's not natural selection, it's logical selection. And those are the things that are going to get stronger and stronger. And the things that are stupid and phantasmagorically idiotic are going to get weaker and weaker.
Try to make it more difficult for oneself to go in one direction rather than another. And, it's sort of like breathing. Breathing is something that you can kind of consciously control. In fact, yogis can get very good at controlling their breathing and maybe, inhale at a certain count and exhale at a certain count and get very meditative about it. But at a certain point, you forget about it and your breath goes on its own autonomous accord. And I think that's sort of like our experience of agency. I think we do have great...
we just, like I said, again, we're not controlling it. It is controlling us. The ideas, the memes, the TV shows, all these things control us. We do not control it. Yet, and when it does something that our brain, the logic programs, say that was logical, good move, and we reward ourselves like we did it. And no, the programs did it.
Great senses of it. I mean, and it's as if nature freed up a capacity for what we're going to call freedom. Now, what we call freedom has a lot to do with the kind of memory capacity.
Well, again, see, that's it. You said what we call freedom. So let's concede this word is full of trouble. This is a troublesome word, because the only way this word can make any sense is in the context of entrapment. And what are you going to be entrapped by? The most entrapping force that can happen to a brain is to be entrapped by knowledge. That's why the whole friggin' Adam and Eve metaphor. That was the blight and the burden of knowledge. Knowledge confines your freedom. Because now you know right from wrong. And now, shit. you're going to have to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing.
We have, and the imaginative capacity we have to collectively negotiate toward a future, to anticipate, likely outcomes from events. I think one of the major issues that I'm going to try to... I've already shot a bunch of videos on them. I'll see if I can post some of the links to them here. I'll put a good number of links. I've shot so many videos on these in the past, but part of the real concern that I've had is, and I also talked about Darwinian evolution being true, and I want to stress that when I say that Darwinian evolution is a fact, I'm not saying that it's the only fact that...
Yeah, well, that's just the joke right there. I mean, if the denial of Darwinian evolution is to start talking about leprechauns and dragons and whatever other poofy little fairy creatures you can come up with, well, then you've broken evolution. You can't say you believe in evolution and you're going to add on these fake, non-existent forms.
It's relevant to understanding the cosmos or the human condition, right? I think we know that before the eukaryote invasion, there was a rule of life that was prior to what we're going to call evolution through natural selection.
Well, I think that's just nonsense. It was always evolution through natural selection. There was always a flaw in the mechanism. The mechanism was always vulnerable to creating the defective blueprint. That was the mechanism of DNA replication. And at any moment, the first cell could have actually created a bad copy of itself, one that had a flaw in its DNA. It just happened that it was a survivable flaw, so it reproduced that survivable flaw. So I don't think that's true. I just don't think so. What happened is that evolution became much more accelerated. The more it's almost as if the mechanism acquired faculties that did create more mutation, more brokenness, in the hope that the broken would be better. That's how evolution works. It doesn't deliberately create better. It just breaks what is and hopes the brokenness happens to be advantageous.
So, it's not even true for the first, billion years of life. It's only the last 3.5 billion years that Darwinian selection would even make sense. So it's not...
I just think that's just absolute nonsense. So, no, you're not going to get away with that. Again, any DNA molecule that's replicating is functioning under natural selection. It just is. It's... The replication is the copy. The DNA itself is copying. Its strands are copying. That's how DNA works. And those copies can be flawed. And as long as that flawed copy can pop out into the world, the game called natural selection is on.
That we're denying other forms of evolution, and even what I was going to say is, the issue is that...
Well, that's another other forms of evolution. I don't know what that means.
Difference between cultural evolution, and again, even the word is a little stretched there, and natural evolution.
Well, obviously there's two completely different things, and you're going to talk about memes and stuff. Yeah, these are very different things. There's a very different way of the contagion, a very different way of defining how it succeeds. And it's more viral in nature and more... There's lots of other words you could use. It's just a very different kind of evolution, and it's not natural selection anymore. You could call it popular selection, or you could call it even logical selection, that over time it will tend to become more and more logical over time, or at least more informed.
Evolution, we can identify those processes of genetic inheritance and random variation, and then the kind of natural selection that goes on through survival value and adaptability to certain environmental conditions. That's so different, though, than, I guess, the kinds of exercise.
Yeah, but again, remember that the test is always in the long term. You got to survive millions of years. That's ultimately, because that's only the ones that are ever going to get counted anyway in this game. And ultimately essentially everything goes extinct. It fails eventually. It runs its course because something else finds a way to pry it out of its place. Well, I can't say inevitably. There could be something called the perfect organism that's incapable of being taken down by any virus or any bigger adversary. Yeah, it's all that niche dynamics. So, I mean, there's stuff that's going to be to your advantage for a week, for a month, for a year. It might even be to your advantage for 10 years. But eventually, it might not be to your advantage. It's kind of like that whole idea of the 20-year flood zone. Well, the 20-year flood might not show up for 100 years. You might get away with it for 100 years. But it's going to show up.
Of agency between collective people who are imagining a future together, and there does, I think Anthony Wilden's work I can't recommend enough to people. I don't know if people haven't seen his work. He's got so many good books. There's just one, Man, Woman, War and Peace. I don't know if I have some of the other stuff, but I think part of the argument would be that natural evolution is, again, roughly Darwinian, whereas cultural evolution it's more Lamarckian. It's more caught in young.
Yeah, well, whatever. I mean, the idea that it strives to do something, again, is just wrong. The memes have, again, their own kind of deterministic future. When one flies into my head, it's going to be determined based on what the structure is inside of my head, whether it's going to stick or whether it's going to bounce off my brain. Whether I'm going to become infected, and it depends on how the meme is shaped. So you got two forms here. You got how exactly the meme is shaped, what kind of frosting it has on it, whether it's going to stick inside my brain. But it's all deterministic again. The words are no different than the script.
Younger generations seeing trajectories in the future, and it's. I think it has a greater recognition of the kind of teleology that I guess contemporary biological theory has largely abandoned. Now, if you take a concept like memes, which I've expressed my concern over before, memes as an expression seems to place agency where it's not, and this is partly maybe.
I don't even think that even. I don't see any way you can destruct the idea that these words. You're a word guy. That words are memes themselves. The very concept, piano, is a meme. First you have to make a piano, then you have to label the piano, and then you have somebody play the piano. And that's the idea, the concept. And it's conveyed, and people experience it. The piece of music itself is a meme. These are things that people... Well, come on. I just don't know how you can argue the concept. That is what is evolving, spiraling through cultures. And it will spiral through cultures, and it will... The standard of survival, in my opinion, does progressively tend towards enlightenment.
Why I'm shouting this out to Matt here, why I have some reservations about the meme expression, because that wants to put agency where agency perhaps isn't. And it rhymes with gene. You're waiting for somebody with a white lab coat to come out. It sounds so scientific, and that itself, if that's what it's
well, it sort of is in terms of what knocks down God. Why is there no God in Europe and there's still a God in the United States? Well, there's a reason. We don't know all the reasons, but they're cultural and through time, and maybe the existence of monarchs gave more energy to be, to be skeptical. Maybe something else, but the point is there is a dynamic, and it can be understood.
Straight is that it's not always conscious.
I mean, we're all aware that it's the right place at the right time phenomenon, and it just happens and it works and it's funnier, or it's more sincere, or it's more something. It's more genuine, and it changes everything.
How certain ideas gain ground, gain, I guess, a capacity to, quote, replicate themselves and disseminate themselves.